Hi, this is the Eightfold Path to Writing a Killer Capstone Paper, part of the Biodefense Capstone course online. Your professor has just assigned a brutal capstone paper. You have 4 months to find a way to write this paper. The problem is that you've never written anything like that before, and you're really not sure what you're doing. But you have dreams of getting an A and getting that big job or promotion. Follow Thrall's Eightfold Path to manage the process and do great work. Now, I know you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, there's an eightfold path to righteousness and better grades? Where have they been hiding this from me all this time? And, I'm sorry, I can only be so many places at one time, so maybe I haven't gotten to you yet, but you're here now. And so let me explain the Eightfold Path and see if we can't help you write a great capstone paper. Step 1, identify an interesting and doable research question. Now, I'm going to explain more about what I mean by interesting and doable in another lecture, but suffice it to say that if we possibly can, we want to write things that are interesting, important, and more importantly for us on a personal note, doable. You need to be able to finish it this term. So that's step 1 is figure out something everyone wants to read. Once you've done that, the next step is to conduct some literature review. There are many reasons why we do literature reviews, and a lot of times civilians don't quite understand why the literature review part is so important. But you have to remember that you're joining a conversation in progress on pretty much any topic you choose to write about. And again, we'll say more about this in a future lecture. But, it really doesn't help anyone if you say stuff that's already been said. So when you walk into a room and you hear people having a conversation about something, typically you'll wait and listen to make sure what they're talking about, what the issues are, get a feel for what's been said and what hasn't been said, so that you can add and contribute something useful. Right? You're looking for a way to contribute to this conversation, not to restate things that are already obvious to everyone. So the first reason to do a literature review is to make sure you say things that are contributions and not just restatements of what people already know. A second reason to do a literature review is that by reading what other people have written, you're going to sharpen your own ideas. As it says in Proverbs, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And your assumptions and expectations and all those sorts of things will be challenged by the literature that you read. So that's another reason we do literature reviews. A third reason that is, I think, a lot less obvious to most people who don't do research for a living is that the literature is where we find tools and frameworks. It's not just books and articles, it's tools and frameworks. When you have a question and you're asking yourself, how do I answer this question? What is the tool or framework I'll use to get some traction on this problem? That's what the literature is for. The literature, people have already looked at problems that are either very similar or they've looked at the same problem and they have a set of tools that you can borrow. Now, one of the things about doing the literature review is often the case we're pretty sure that previous tools haven't been able to quite solve the problem. But that doesn't mean you throw them all out. What that means typically is that you're going to borrow those tools and see why they haven't worked and then try to improve them. So you're looking at the literature for tools and frameworks. I mean, theories. These are the things we use in academia all the time to try to answer problems. Realism, organization theory, you name it. Those are our tools. And so you conduct the literature review to figure out what the right tools for the job are. And then the last piece is that, of course, the literature is the source of a lot of data in itself. If you're writing a case study, the literature written about the event or organization in question can in fact be the data that you're going to use as evidence for your own arguments. So the literature review that you're going to do is going to have a lot of different uses, and it is really a key initial step in getting a great project completed. Once you have a research question in hand, you've done some review of the literature, and you figured out really what you're interested in doing, then it's time to conceptualize and operationalize your variables. And, since Government 500, you may have tried to avoid the use of the word variable, but even if you don't like the idea of calling things variables, you have them. And so let me take sort of the meat and potatoes kind of example of the kind of thing people write capstone papers about. Very commonly, people want to do some kind of policy analysis exercise. So they want to answer a question like, how effective has U.S. biodefense policy been? Or how effective is the war on terror? Or something like that. Right? Well, the very first thing you're going to need to do is to define your terms. So if you say, how effective is the war on terror, you have to define the boundaries of the war on terror. What do you mean, the war on terror? What part of it? All of it? Some of it? What are the boundaries? What are you considering and what are you not considering in your analysis? So, if that's your dependent variable, or you have to define it. So that's step one. Then you have to operationalize these things. When you say effective, what do you mean, right? Define that term and then explain how you're going to operationalize that in your study. How are you going to measure effectiveness? There are probably a million ways you could do it. You need to pick one or two or three and defend your use of those and figure out exactly how you're going to measure it. Are you going to measure it in dollars? Are you going to measure it in lives saved? Are you going to measure it in public opinion? Are you going to measure it in interviews with people who rate it on a scale of 0 to 10? Right? So, in other words, you need to do a lot of work to figure out exactly how you're going to measure whatever it is you're studying. After you've done that, it's time to really think about your methods and your data. And of course, I separate these steps a little bit artificially because sometimes these have to all happen kind of at once or in an iterative fashion. But once you've figured out what policy you're studying, what you think it means, what the boundaries of it are, and how you think you might want to study it, then it's time to really get down to brass tacks and figure out exactly what the process you're going to use, what the methods you're going to use to do that measuring. If I'm going to measure it in dollars, how am I going to go find out those dollars? If I'm going to measure it in public opinion, how am I going to measure that public opinion? Or if you think there's already data to go collect, where is it? Right? And so the methods and data that you're going to use will vary depending on what kind of question you're asking, depending on your own preferences, how you like to study things, the time you have available, because some things take a long time and it's probably not a good idea to try doing them. Doing a nationwide survey on your own for this project is probably out of the question, given you only have a few months. And then, of course, it depends on data availability. And I'll say more about this in another lecture, but obviously you can only do projects for which there is data. And there are a lot of great projects for which there isn't data, unfortunately. It's just something we have to keep in mind. Then, step 5, do stuff. Once you've measured twice, it's time to cut. And so you're going to do your interviews, you're going to conduct your surveys, join the cult, read your books, do whatever kind of things that you need to do to get your data of whatever kind it is that comes that bears on your question. And that can be the fun part, depending on what kind of project you have. It can be a little bit of drudgery or a little bit of both, depending. I've had projects that were both kinds. But obviously, this is the part that you have to do to have something to write about. So if you don't have data, you don't have anything. So that's a really big piece there. Step 5, do it. Then once you have it, right, the trick is interpreting what you found. And hopefully one of your interpretations provides the answer to your research question. How effective is the war on terror? I hope you found a good way to measure it, and I hope you came up with an answer. But in addition, you're also going to find things sort of related, key themes or conditions under which, or issues arising that your study speaks to that maybe wasn't the direct thing, but it has implications. Those are really important pieces of this process that you're going to encounter as you interpret your data and analyze the results of whatever study it is that you did. And then one of the things we always do as analysts and academics is explain the limits of our own research. We may have answered the question fairly well, but maybe in only a particular area, and we have to caution people that don't take this and generalize it to mean also these other 3 things, because I didn't study those other 3 things directly. And even if this is suggestive, just be careful, don't make assumptions, that sort of stuff. And then a really big point here is that, it sort of doesn't really matter if you understand the answer to the question when you're done, because if you can't explain it clearly to others and interpret what you've learned for others, then you really haven't finished the job. And so one of the really key pieces of step 6 is to interpret this in a way that other people will understand. And so that goes to the writing process and some other things. But that's a really big part of it as well. Then, step 7, once you've got all the data and you have analyzed and interpreted and you have your key themes, it's time to write. And there's a particular way, I think, that is best to write in general. Now, there's lots of flavors of how the best way is, but in general, the best way to write is to create an outline and then write a first draft. And in particular, outlining, and I'll say more about this in another lecture as well, outlining pays off big time for a few basic reasons. I know that many students don't seem to do it, and I can usually tell. But outlining is great for a bunch of reasons. First is by doing a rigorous process of of matching your research question and your methods to an outline, you will have a higher quality product because you're not going to miss stuff. It's all going to be well organized and so on. Because you're well organized and you've thought ahead about the structure, you also have noticed that it is faster to write a draft. And because it's higher quality and it's going faster and it's less work to think when you're writing because you've already figured out where it's all going, it's less stressful to do the writing. And let me tell you, that's not a small thing. Then the key thing is when you've had your outline, you're writing to that outline, what you're producing, you should realize, is a first draft, not the final draft. The first thing you write is not the thing you're turning in. Why is that? Well, it turns out that, if, to borrow some, let's see, sort of a painting analogy, if you will, if academics write books that are, let's compare them to, say, Renaissance master paintings, immodestly. And by that I mean it takes years to write them. They have many layers. People go back to them over and over, revising and fixing and adding bits and pieces and making everything just so. If that's what an academic book looks like, then a student term paper or capstone paper more closely resembles Japanese brush art. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's these big, long brushes, and they have these natural hairs on the end, and they dip in the paint, and they sit before this big piece of canvas, and they have only a few seconds to dip and then paint the one stroke. They never let the brush really lift off the paper, because once they do, the ink dries, and you're done. You can't go back to it. And so the art of it is to make one pass and make the thing just right. Well, that's kind of like student papers, because students tend to do it once, they do it quick, and they don't revisit. And that is not a great recipe for success, as I'll mention step 8 here. And so the way to think of this is to think of this as a first draft. You're outlining, you're writing to the first draft, and a first draft is fantastic motivation, because when you have a complete draft of your project, you're going to be motivated to finish. You're going to know it's possible. It's going to also help you see the whole project in a way that having bits and parts written won't do, and that's going to help you fix problems before it's too late. Like if you write one draft right before the thing is due, and as you're 3/4 in, you realize, oh crap, I'm missing a section, or that doesn't make sense, or I now realize that something I should have done, it's too late. So a first draft is a great way to avoid that, and that leads us to step 8, which is to review, revise, and then write your final draft. And revision really is the secret magic of great work. When you read a journal article, you may be intimidated by them. I certainly am. But remember, these things did not spring forth out of someone's head late at night right before the deadline. Students, I think, often admire, if you will, the work that's published in journal articles, especially the ones that you are often assigned to read, which are the best of the best. And those things are typically works that took many, many months, if not years, to conceive of and to implement and then to write. And a big part of that process was revision. I calculated that in my dissertation, I rewrote the average section of that dissertation 9 times. I was new to the game. Maybe that's too many, but frankly, that's not out of the question for a really important work that you may revisit many times if something's going to take you years to write, for example. Now, your average journal article, I don't rewrite things 9 times, but 4 or 5, that's not out of the question. At the very least, you want to give yourself one good chance to revise your work. And so I can promise you that although your thinking doesn't necessarily change a ton, a lot of times, people think, oh, I don't need to revise. I kind of got the whole shtick when I thought through it the first time. And yeah, you might get 90% of the quote-unquote analysis or answer the first pass through, but what you're probably not going to get is 90% of the quality of the communication. That takes revision. Your rough draft might get half of the communication quality, but it takes more revision to get the whole way there and to write something that really sings, that really speaks to people, that's really engaging and clear. And most students never do this. I totally understand it. I never did when I was an undergrad. I didn't do it when I was a grad student until I started writing my dissertation. That was the first time I ever did this. But just to let you know, it's the best way to do it. And of course, in this class, it's mandatory that you turn in a rough draft. So you're going to do some revising. And As it turns out, and this is something I also learned later in life, the best revision is revision that incorporates the feedback of others who are interested in seeing you do your best work. That's why journals do review, peer review. That's why people have writing partners and writing groups. And I certainly encourage you to take full advantage of your writing partner this term. So we've had 8 steps. You've seen the sort of soup to nuts evolution of a paper. And I promise you that when you follow this path, good things will happen. I'm not sure I can promise you love, financial security, glory, and all those sorts of things, but I'm confident. I think I can, in fact, guarantee that you will write a high-quality paper if you follow these steps. Okay, good luck on the Eightfold Path. See you online, and good luck.